crisis now.
Should I do a selfie here? Welcome to my hometown. So good to have you here. It's a delight to welcome the ISFG to Washington, D.C. And this is something we've dreamed of for many years, to be able to bring this wonderful society and group together as we talk about forensic genetics, forensic DNA that can help the world. So I'm going to, I first came to Washington, D.C. more than 30 years ago because I love American history. And so I worked in the National Archives when I first came here. And so it's fun to be able to share a little bit about the history. I'm grateful that Mekki did such a great job giving you a history of ISFG. Because we have so many from the United States here, we get a chance to kind of welcome you to this wonderful society. We use presidents, as you noticed at various events. This was at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences in 2020, where we welcomed or invited people to come. And notice that this had the year 2021 on there. So, laser's not working. So we had 2021, and obviously, thanks to a little molecule, that provided an opportunity for people to work virtually for a while. We didn't have a chance to come together in 2021, but we are delighted that you're able to be here with us now, and we look forward to a wonderful week of discussions and working together to build a greater community. I thought that give a brief history about George Washington and about Washington, D.C. What better way to do that than as George Washington. So there's really three primary things that he did to help form this country that helped influence the world. And I'm going to show this through various paintings. The first is that he was in charge of the Continental Army that had to repel the British Empire, the most powerful army and navy in the world at the time, from the 13 colonies we had here. He actually lost most of his battles over the 8 years, but he was able to keep the armies together and win the Revolutionary War. When he finished, he stepped down and went back to his home in Mount Vernon. And King George, the King of England at the time, said, George Washington is the greatest person in history because he's willing to give up power and step away from that. At that time, 1700s, there had never been a former head of state. If you won a military battle, you became the head of the country or whatever, that you took over it. So he was the first one to really step away and set an example of that. He then presided over the Continental Congress that formed the Constitutional Convention in 1787 that formed the United States Constitution, serving as the president of that. And then finally, once the American government was established, he served as the first executive, as the president of the United States, the first president of the United States, for 2 terms. He was elected unanimously both times, the only person in history to ever have done that, and served from 1789 to 1797. And then he went home. He went back to Mount Vernon and passed away several years later. When he passed away, it was said at his funeral that he was first in war, he was first in peace, and he was first in the hearts of his countrymen. And that's the message of who George Washington was. So when you have a chance to see something like Mount Vernon, this is the home that he went to. He inherited this at age 20 in 1752 from when his older brother passed away. And so this became a large plantation. He was a scientist in the fact that he was very careful with reading all the available literature that's available on how to improve agriculture and to try to grow his crops and his farm, and did a wonderful job with that. Had a very successful farm. It was located about 15 miles down the Potomac River from here. He was also instrumental in, he was a surveyor and had established the kind of knowledge of what the land looked like. He was one that picked this site become the future capital of Washington, D.C., D.C. standing for the District of Columbia. So he served as the first of, we now have had 46 presidents. We currently have our 46th president, Joseph Biden, and he was the first in that. He was the only president to not live in the White House. It hadn't been built yet. They just were establishing the city and were building that. So John Adams, the second president, was the first one to live in the White House. So if you have a chance to go by the White House while you're here, it's a wonderful place to visit. The Washington Monument is built in his honor. It embodies the awe, the respect, the gratitude that the nation felt for this founding father. There's two phases of the construction, and so if you look closely, you'll see the lower half is lighter stone than the upper half, and that is because they ran out of money. When they were building it in 1854, they ran out of money, and it took 25 years for them to raise enough money. The government took over building it, and they built the top 2/3 with a stone from a different part of the quarry, thus a different color. So since we like to talk in metrics, it's 169.26 meters in height. That was actually measured by NIST, where I work, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. In 1999, actually went and measured the exact height. And so they say it's 555 feet, but it's not exactly that. And it's 55 feet wide at the base. Again, scientists involved in measuring these things. Except for this monument, there's nothing allowed to be taller than the U.S. Capitol, which is why you see no skyscrapers in Washington, D.C. And that's important to understand, that this obelisk is the only building that's allowed to be taller. And when it was initially finished in 1884, it was the largest building in the world. The Eiffel Tower passed it a few years later when it was built in Paris, but until this time, it was the largest structure that had ever been built. So, since we're talking about DNA testing, we can talk about U.S. presidents' DNA testing. There's been some testing that's been involved with U.S. presidents. So I did my PhD research at the FBI laboratory in the early 1990s as the mitochondrial DNA unit was being established. Joe DeZino and Mark Wilson were involved in setting that unit up. And one of the things I developed, my very first paper, was on quantifying mitochondrial DNA, developing a method to do that, a method that's still used today with different instrumentation, but it's the same method that was described in the 1994 article. In late 1993, the FBI received several hairs that were believed to be from George Washington to see if they could get mitochondrial DNA from it. Unfortunately, no mitochondrial DNA was able to be quantified from that, and therefore, there's nothing to talk about in terms of George Washington and DNA. So the first president that we can talk about in terms of DNA testing is the 42nd president, Bill Clinton, very famous stain on a blue dress, and the RFLP testing that was done at the time, a direct match to that, giving a result in random match probably of 1 in 7.8 trillion. Very strong evidence that led to some things happening there. Shortly thereafter, a couple months later, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, was connected, his family was connected, not him specifically, but that's the way the press did it, was that the Y chromosome kinship association was made and published in Nature by several members of ISFG, all three of who have spoken, Chris Tyler Smith, Mark Jobling, and Peter D. Knife. Their laboratories in Europe were involved in doing the testing on the Jefferson families and the Hemmings families, and were able to show this connection to the Jefferson family, with the Hemmings family to the Jefferson Y chromosome. And so again, they've all spoken and been keynote speakers at ISFG in the past. My very first ISFG in Europe in 2001, Chris Tyler Smith spoke there. It's really fascinating to hear about some of his work in Y chromosome. The last president I'll talk about is the 29th president, Warren Harding. Since later this week we'll be talking about genetic genealogy, he was actually implicated as fathering a child out of wedlock a few years ago in 2015 with the DNA Ancestry Association over genetic genealogy. So we've had a number of technologies used on U.S. presidents over the years and have had an impact on history. Think about that. So you'll see links to all of these. So I'm going to put these slides up on our website, isfg2022.org, that'll go up by tomorrow, and then you can click on each of the stories and see these slides in more detail if you'd like. So a president typically addresses a Congress, like we have here, in giving a State of the Union address. So this is a picture of President Obama in 2010. giving a State of the Union to the joint houses of Congress, to the U.S. Supreme Court, and to the American public via television, and to the world, is how a State of the Union is given. So it's required in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, that the President shall, from time to time, give to the Congress information on the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. And in January 8, 1790, George Washington gave the very first State of the Union address, because he was the first president. And this talked about a number of things, but it also talked about science. And I'm going to show you some of the very interesting quotes from that and use that to frame the rest of my talk. So the U.S. presidents now will give a State of the Union speech in terms of presenting it using televised to Congress and to the American people. It can also be written. And President Jimmy Carter in 1979 has the record for the longest State of the Union address, 33,000 words. Fortunately, that wasn't read to the people. It would have taken several hours. And George Washington holds the record for the shortest State of the Union, which was that first one in 1790. It was 1,089 words in length. Though there's actually been lots of the lengths of the speeches. And so the longest speeches were given by Bill Clinton and by Donald Trump. And again, comparing that to Washington. So my goal tonight is to be a little bit more like Washington, a little less like Clinton or Trump. The reading level of State of the Union addresses has also been on the decline over the years. It started at a college level and now is moving downwards towards middle school level. And so I wonder if that downward trend is necessarily a good thing, plotting some scientific stuff there. So let's get to George Washington's first State of the Union address, given in January 1790. This is the text from it. You can get it from Mount Vernon's website. And in this, he emphasizes the uniformity in currency and in weights and measures of the United States is an object of great importance and will, I am persuaded, be duly attended to. So he emphasizes the need to have connectivity, the ability to communicate information to people through currency to be able to exchange commerce and stuff that way. Second, he encourages the introduction of new and useful inventions from abroad and the exertion of skill and genius in producing them at home. In fact, one of the very first acts that he passed was the formation of the U.S. Patent Office and the ability to patent inventions. So he's very interested in developing technology and making sure that that was being used effectively. And finally, he concluded that there is nothing which can be better serve our patronage than the promotion of science and literature. Knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness. And so if you kind of break these things down, we have an emphasis on wanting to enable connectivity, interconnectivity, so we can communicate information, whether it's currency and exchange of money and goods, or if it's the weights and measures to be able to communicate things that way. We have the desire to develop technology, and we have the desire to share knowledge and to promote science. And I would submit that these are the three key principles and purposes of the International Society for Forensic Genetics. And so tonight, I wanted to give a shout out to the things that Washington pointed out. And since I work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, this is where he really emphasizes that we need to have weights and measures. It's of great importance and will be duly attended to. Well, it took another 110 years before the formation of the National Bureau of Standards, or NIST since 1988, as it's been called, to create an institution to be able to look at uniform weights and measures. And this is the words that are printed on the wall in our administration building, that this should be a scientific work of the government to the establishment of an institution proposed in this bill, which is to establish the National Bureau of Standards. So again, this goes back to the call out that President Washington made 110 years before to have uniform things. So what's the message there? Sometimes, this is a reminder, sometimes the government moves slower than desired. So tonight, I would like to offer, in terms of looking at the progress in forensic genetics over the past 3 years, and the impact of ISFG and of FSI genetics, and provide a State of the Union address or a state of the field. And so I'll take off the wig and become John again. Okay, so I previously gave a written State of the Union in the January issue of 2021 and FSI Genetics. And in here I just presented a brief message from the President. And this is where we first announced that the ISFG 2021 was going to be moved to 2022, and we're holding it now. We talked about a virtual summer school. Many of you participated in that, and that was an opportunity for people to learn virtually around the world about forensic genetics. We talked about a group in Germany that was developing a way to track DNA transfer. An excellent database that's been developed. There's some work that will be presented here at this meeting on that topic. Peter Gill's and colleagues' book, The Forensic Practitioner's Guide to Interpretation of Complex DNA Profiles, is discussed there, and mentioning that Peter has donated the royalties from that to the ISFG to help with education. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in the General Assembly on Thursday night. But thank you, Peter. Thank you, all of your colleagues, for that. And then finally, we published the recommendations from the Italian working group that had been prepared by them, sharing those things. So just, again, as Mekhi has mentioned about the history of ISFG, these are some of the things that they did in this written State of the Union. So I would like to use George Washington's 3 principles I laid out: enabling interconnectivity, developing technology, and sharing knowledge and promoting science, to discuss what's been happening in the last 3 years in our field. So these really, as I mentioned, are the purpose of the International Society for Forensic Genetics. Of course, interconnectivity, it benefits DNA databases and quality controls, depend on common allele nomenclature, core loci, commercial kits, reference materials, collaborative exercises, documentary standards, other guidance documents, in order to allow that interconnectivity of information. This is done through the ISFG DNA commissions and the working group's collaborative exercises, as Mekhi has pointed out. Under developing technology, there's many new developments that have been happening, and many of the people in this room are directly responsible for those developments. And so I want to applaud you for those wonderful efforts you're making in your laboratories, research and practitioner laboratories to make these things happen. Improving DNA recovery, rapid DNA, next-gen sequencing, probabilistic genotyping software, investigative genetic genealogy, phenotyping, and activity level reporting. And we're going to hear about all these topics through the posters and oral presentations of this week. But certainly FSI Genetics, the official ISFG journal, is a great place to learn them. And there has been 439 articles published since our last ISFG meeting, emphasizing the wonderful value of having the ability to write things down and share them with others and promoting the science that way. And then finally, with conferences like this one, we have, and publications, we have the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants. You are the giants that we stand on the shoulders of to be able to move the field forward. So this week, as Heather and Christian have mentioned, we have 16 workshops we've just concluded, 62 talks, and 262 posters where we have a chance to really learn together and grow as a community. So I'll begin with enabling interconnectivity and the purpose, again, of the commissions. This is a summary of the ISFG commissions. There's been 21 DNA commissions to date, again, providing recommendations, considerations to enable interconnectivity and advance the quality of forensic DNA evidence. We have under autosomal STRs and allele nomenclature articles going back to 1994, 97, and 2016 that talk about repeat nomenclature and why do we call an allele a 9.3? That was defined by ISFG DNA Commission. We have mitochondrial DNA, 2 commissions for the mitochondrial DNA, 3 for Y chromosome, 1 for the X chromosome, 4 that relate to DNA mixtures and assessing evidence, and then a variety of other topics with polymorphisms, disaster victim identification, biostatistics, non-human DNA, the use of Strider in an autosomal DNA database, and software validation. Again, the way I made this slide, when you see these PDFs, you can click on each of those links, the hyperlinks there of the papers, and it will take you back to the paper that's on the ISFG website and enabling you to get access to that information. We've currently had 2 active DNA commissions, one on STR nomenclature with DNA sequencing information that Catherine Gettings is leading, and that's building on the STRAND efforts, and you can hear more about that on Wednesday. We have the phenotyping and building on the Visage efforts, have been going on throughout Europe for the number of years that Manfred Kaiser is leading. And so we have a chance to learn more, and we'll have more standardization on these topics because of these active DNA commissions. This is just to illustrate some of the ones that have been published in the last few years. Two led by Peter Gill, the DNA commissions related to the importance of propositions and forming subsource propositions and then activity level propositions and separating those out and distinguishing results, propositions, and explanations and so on. We have the Y chromosome, one that Lutz Rohr led and published in 2020 that talks about evaluating profiles, decision process for DNA interpretation. It's illustrated here. The frequency estimations, databases, and 6 fundamental requirements for databases, which YHRD follows. The reporting guidelines, and further considerations as we move forward with rapidly mutating YSTR panels, and so on. Specific recommendations about using the discrete Laplace approach with likelihood ratios for doing this, and also reporting information beyond just the database result in this. We have working groups that have been that Meki talked about. There's 13 working groups. The Japanese one right now is not active, so there are 12 active working groups. They're mostly defined by language in order to enable interconnectivity, so we can have more conversations and work. Those groups can work together. These serve as an important forum for the exchange of information and for growth in those countries and those languages to help solve problems there. And finally, developing platforms for quality control and proficiency test exercises, which I'll show in a moment. There are a number of proficiency tests and collaborative exercises that have been developed by these groups. The Italian group, the Spanish-Portuguese group, the English-speaking working group that does relationship testing every year, and now the CADNAP, the canine, does a proficiency test as well. This is just a summary that I made of the various collaborative exercises and interlab studies that have been published in the last few years in FSI genetics and who originated them. So the first one, for example, forensic applications of massively parallel sequencing. It comes from the Spanish-Portuguese working group, where 7 laboratories looked at 2 different platforms, and that was published by Barrio et al. in 2020. One on XSTR mutation rates from 16 labs that Leonor Guzmeo and Pinto et al. Led in 2020. Body fluid ID, mock casework with messenger RNA, methylation, and so on. And then the last one being the relationship testing, proficiency test that is done every year with the English-speaking working group. You can come tomorrow if you want to hear more about the results from this year in the English-speaking working group tomorrow night. Okay, let's move on to developing technology. Again, this is the primary purpose of publishing FSI genetics. We have a number of things happening in the field, of course, under investigations. We have phenotyping and ancestry. We're going to hear more about that tomorrow from Chris Phillips as we start the meeting out in the morning. We will hear more on Friday about investigative genetic genealogy and efforts that can be done with GEDmatch and other tools that are available there. A number of method improvements. As you go and look at the posters and you hear the talks, you'll learn a lot about the things that are being improved all around the world in various labs, and process mapping and robotics and all kinds of things that are happening. We have, on the analysis side, many improvements have happened in MPS and in rapid DNA. And then on the interpretation side, we have, of course, probabilistic genotyping, activity level evaluations. We've had some of the workshops have been focused on this. So these advances are recorded in the literature, so as Isaac Newton famously stated, we can stand on the shoulders of giants to see further. So there's been 439 articles published since the Prague ISFG meeting in the journal. There's been 18 volumes, 18 issues, 439 articles. So what I do when I post this presentation, I'll post along with it an alphabetical listing of all those articles, so you can go and see those in more detail if you haven't already seen those. But I'm working on breaking those up into categories and doing further analysis on that. If you look at the overall journal, and we'll hear more, those who attend the General Assembly on Thursday night, we'll hear more from Angel Caracedo about what's happening right now with the journal. But just giving an overview of the journal, there have been 16 years now that we've had FSI genetics, 60 volumes, 86 issues, and 2,343 articles that have been published. That is real impact, and that comes from the efforts of all of you and many colleagues around the world that aren't here at this meeting that are making a difference. And if we break down, look at what's going on with those 439 articles between volume 43 and volume 60, we can see the many things that are happening in the field and the great advances being made. The cover changed since we had our last meeting in 2019, and the editors have changed over time. When it first started, Peter Snyder and I were with Angel Caracedo as the editors. Then that expanded to include Adrian and Leonore, and then Walter and Peter Vallone were added in order to expand the board, and I stepped off as I became ISFG president. It's a lot of work, and I want to compliment their efforts, and all of you who serve as reviewers and answer their requests for reviews, because that's what strengthens our community and allows things to grow. If you look at the journals, this is an analysis from Scopus that I did last week. The top 30 journals in forensic genetics. The reason it's 445 is there's a few articles been published since the last issue closed, the 439 I mentioned earlier. But you can see how much further FSI genetics is ahead of International Journal of Legal Medicine, Forensic Science International, or the Journal of Forensic Sciences, and so on. There's a rich source of information available to the community because of the efforts of ISFG, because of your efforts as researchers, and because of the efforts of reviewers and the editors doing that. So I want to compliment you there. The 10 most prolific authors in the last 3 years. Duncan Taylor from Australia wins this. And for FSI genetics alone, see the rankings. Wonderful production of efforts there. And I think they deserve an award for most likely to need more sleep. Certainly, that's a lot of work with everybody out there. If you look at the bigger picture of what's happening in all the journals, then Walter wins out, as Bruce and so on, and Duncan falls at number 4 on that. But it just shows that as you have collaborations and things are happening outside of FSI genetics in other journals as well, there's wonderful things that are happening throughout the community because of your efforts. There's also a number of recent and forthcoming special virtual issues that are happening with in forensic genetics. They're happening in the journal Genes, and I just list some of the ones here, and these are all hyperlinked to those if you want to go see those. And I know there's several that are open for receiving further comments. The one that Niels Morling put together that was just finished has 25 articles in it. It's been included now as of a month ago as a 518-page PDF that puts them all together. And you can buy it as a $130 as a printed book if you want it. Or you can get the articles for free on the website. Just like that link. But the point is that there's a lot of information that's coming out because of the efforts of ISFG members and others around the world that are adding to this knowledge. The NIST is involved with the OSAC, with the Organization of Scientific Areas for Forensic Science, and which is a group of more than 600 people putting together standards in a variety of areas. There's a human forensic biology group, a subcommittee, and what they've done is they've identified 18 specific research and development needs that are out there. And so the first one I just used to illustrate, and I put a link there. If you weren't aware of this, this is something you go to the NIST website and get the information on each of these. Each of these comes with a little description of what's the need out there. And many of the publications and the things that you'll learn about, the presentations at this meeting, directly address those R&D needs. So I would emphasize anybody that's here from OSAC, pay attention to the things that are happening in this meeting. So I just did a breakdown on the first one, which is applications of the microbiome and DNA transfer and human identification. How much is happening in FSI genetics and in this meeting on this topic? So R&D need number 1 is listed there, the use of the microbiome. There are 7 publications since 2019 that relate specifically to this topic. And these are just listed by their numbers in the list that I have, alphabetical list of 40 and 133 and so on. There are 10 presentations at this meeting. There's an oral presentation on Friday, oral 48, and there are 9 posters that relate to this topic. So I invite you, if you're interested in specific topics that relate to these, pay attention to the details that are happening at this meeting, talk to those researchers and practitioners, and learn something that will help benefit the field further. Finally, with sharing knowledge and promoting science. We have in the ISFG 1,292 members from 79 countries as of this week. The United States is the first in terms of the numbers. As Meki talked about, Germany is where ISFG started, and there's 142 members there, but we have 254. We would love to grow this even more significantly because we have the meeting here in this country right now. Spain is where the next ISFG will be held. It's the third of 91 members. The UK and Australia and so on. We'll go from there. In terms of this meeting, Heather mentioned at the beginning that we have 787 registered. Half of them are from the United States. 49% of those of you that are here are from the United States. This is a wonderful opportunity for our U.S. colleagues to learn about and to be part of this effort. And then from 50 other countries that are listed here, I have at least one representative that are present at this meeting. And we have coverage from 32 states. It'd be great if we had all 50 states, but we have 32 states represented here. Now, comparison, and this has been mentioned by Heather and by Christian, in terms of where we compare numbers-wise and country-wise and so on. I broke down just to illustrate the number of abstracts that we had are much lower. And one of the reasons this is, the primary reason this is because as an ISFG board, we decided we want to improve the quality of the posters. You'll notice that in Prague, there were 637 posters. It's impossible in a couple days to look at and really digest 637 posters. I see Tim Clayton nodding his head there. Absolutely. So we decided we're going to concentrate them and emphasize and encourage people, give your best effort in a single poster, and then we can have something that will be even more meaningful in what you get there. So we have most workshops, as has been mentioned, and it's a wonderful opportunity to come together and learn from each other, promote the science, and improve the education there. We have the conference proceedings. You should have received an email today. We apologize it took so long to get Elsevier to send out that email, but we have 19 so far that have agreed to write articles, and so we hope that will continue to grow over the next few weeks. Those are due by the 19th of September so that we can start building that proceedings. So we have a couple weeks to finish those, but we want to thank all of the workshop presenters, the oral presenters, and the poster presenters at this meeting because you are the giants that we stand on to see further as we go forward in this field. So the proceedings from Prague, we had by far the largest proceedings. Volume 7 of FSI Genetic Supplement Series has 914 pages, 347 articles because of those 637 posters. How many of you have read all of those? Probably not, right? So that's the thing is we'd like to be able to share something that's going to be meaningful. Our proceedings will be published. We plan on in December if we can get your contributions to that. By September 19th, we have a goal to be able to finish and have those out by December, this meeting. The conference, I just want to emphasize again how grateful we are, those who donated their efforts and time to prepare wonderful presentations that were heard by many of you over the last full day and half-day workshops. And this really, you had an opportunity to learn from some of the very best in the world on these topics. And I hope you appreciate that and come back to continue to learn more. Many of them presented last year as part of the virtual summer workshop. We will have this week wonderful plenary speakers on ancestry testing, kinship, population genetics, legal issues, interpretation, genetic genealogy. Again, the way that the meetings are set up is we have the plenary and then we have associated talks with those. It's different than some other meetings that you may attend, but this is the way that we've done that. David Kay unfortunately can't attend in person and will share a video with us on Thursday. We also have a special session on the O.J. Simpson trial. We've invited 4 speakers to that. I'm delighted that we're going to have a chance to study and learn from people that are involved with that case that happened 28 years ago, 28 years ago, and you'll get to hear more about that on Thursday afternoon. Those individuals will share what their experiences and what we can learn from that to go forward and do better. How is an ISFG meeting designed? So as Christian mentioned, a bid was made in 2017. At the meeting on Thursday at the General Assembly, we'll have a chance to vote on the where will we be in 2026 between Montreal and Dubai. Those are the choices of bids that have been submitted. So the planning began in earnest back in November of 2019 after the Prague meeting had finished with the local organizing committee led by Christian and Heather. And that the scientific program committee involves the 5 members of the ISFG board and then the Congress president and vice president. And overall, then the scientific topics and invited speakers are decided upon early on, and we then send an invitation to them to kind of frame out the meeting. We then extend invitations to them, and they accepted. We started building the program that way. Then, about 6 months before we want to have the abstracts in, we ask people to send in abstracts. The scientific program committee meets then and selects the orals and posters from that. And then the authors are notified to register for the meeting. The program is finalized and released, and finally the meeting is held. So welcome, we're here for that. So that's how that basically works. This is the scientific program committee as we met. We're doing 415 abstracts. That takes a while to do. But let me tell you, it's much better than doing the 800 abstracts we did for Prague. So from there we selected the orals, the session chairs, and the posters, and we rejected 73 multiple submissions from the same authors. We had one that submitted up 15 abstracts, actually, and so we only accepted one of those. But we also had an additional 45 that didn't register, and therefore they were removed after the process, after poster numbers had been assigned, which is why you don't see a poster number 9, for example. And that's what caused the confusion earlier today. We're grateful that all the posters are where they should be now. As I wrap up and just say, I just love being part of the ISFG. Meki put together at the Prague meeting a 50-year history, which he pulled a lot of the things from this. I first came to ISFG in 1999 and was part of participating in that and at the San Francisco meeting, and have been at every other meeting since then, and have loved contributing and speaking and sharing knowledge, presenting workshops and so on to this wonderful group and wonderful community, the working groups, the journal, and biannual meetings that we have. What's been the impact over the years and over careers? We have helped enable interconnectivity and make it easier to communicate across the world with forensic genetics. We have developed technology together as a community. We have shared that knowledge, and we have promoted science by the efforts of the ISFG. So if you're not a member of the ISFG, join and become part of that. Research and the new markers, new interpretation methods, and collaborations that have been formed over the years originated out of ISFG and then led to great efforts that brought new markers and new efforts together. Population data has come together. But the thing I enjoy the most about ISFG, the meetings, this is my 12th meeting I've been to, is the people. I love the conversations, the discussions we have at this meeting and will have, and I just hope that each of you will take the time to get to know one another and to form a greater union as we work together on these things. I received this in the mail from someone from the Netherlands Forensic Institute right before the pandemic hit, back in March of 2020. And I thought, this is really cool. Just an illustration of the community and the connections that people make. She made a nice double helix here. And I asked her, how did you make this? And she sent me some photos of the process of going through this. According to her, it takes about 6 hours. Selena said it takes about 6 hours to fold all the pages of the book. But it's very fun for an author to receive, to be able to receive a book like that. So it's hanging up, it's in my office at work. So let me conclude with George Washington. Good. I wave back on here. So in the State of the Union address, move back over here to the George Washington position, right? In the State of the Union address, these are the concluding words of George Washington. I've substituted 3 words with ISFG appropriate terms, but the rest of it is from George Washington. They, to me, are very applicable to what we're going to experience this week. The welfare of our, instead of our government, I said our scientific society, ISFG, is the great object to which our cares and efforts ought to be directed. And I shall derive great satisfaction from a cooperation with you in the pleasing though arduous task of ensuring to our fellow, instead of citizens, researchers and practitioners, the blessings which we have a right to expect, instead of from a government, from a well-organized ISFG Congress. Again, I just want to thank our sponsors, the exhibitors that are here, the wonderful local organizing committee and all the efforts that have been made to get to know them better throughout this week. And I've included a thank you slide in all the languages of ISFG. So, thank you for your attention.